Welcome to iWound. We're all faced with challenging times. The pandemic requires creative thought leaders to reach their customers in safe and effective ways. At iWound, we're proud of our game-changing bedside solution. Wound Care 2020 remains a multi-billion-dollar pull on our healthcare system. Hospitals, clinics, long-term care, and community care agencies would make a huge impact if they provided accurate assessment, thorough documentation, through educating every clinician at the bedside. iWound does not only serve the wound specialist and the wound team. iWound educates the entire staff, making your wound team more effective. iWound is the system change. We are proud to provide you our solution today.
Welcome back to the MedTech Trends podcast, everyone. I'm your host again, Dorian. So today we have with us Robin Mossing. So he's joining us from a company called iWound. Now, a little bit about Robin before we get into it. So he is a clinician by training. He brings with him about 2 decades of clinical experience, which is not something that you get from every company founder and CEO. So that's fantastic. He's also regarded highly as a serial entrepreneur, and as evidence of that, so he previously founded a company called Best Practices Consultants, Inc., which delivers advanced wound care nursing education to healthcare professionals across Canada. He also previously founded Wound Outcomes, Inc., and there he was involved in cost containment measures, and he also drove outcomes through nurse practitioner education and procedures training, I believe. He also successfully led an exit through Practical Medical Supply, Inc. And at the moment, and the topic of the conversation for today, so he is acting as the Executive Vice President of Clinical Operations at a company called iWound. Now, iWound is a game changer in the wound care space. He is, and we'll get into that in quite a bit of detail today. So I'm looking forward to it. He's also part of a leadership team that includes David Westlake, who's acting as chairman and CEO, and Ray Garneau, who's currently president. And he could not be more proud to be part of this fantastic team. So again, look forward to getting into this conversation. Robin, glad to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you very much for that gracious introduction. I appreciate that very much.
Well, I mean, you deserve it. It's again, like it's not a commonplace thing to see founders and CEOs of successful companies that actually bring that firsthand experience into the work that they do. And this is something that you certainly are doing. This is one of the questions that I had. I'm very curious about your career as a clinician, actually, because you spent several decades doing this work. You know the space inside and out, probably better than anybody. And how did you shift over? How did you shift from a clinical experience, clinical background into the entrepreneurial space? What was that like?
Well, easy question to answer, but I have to retool the question a little. I didn't shift. A lot of people would say, you built a company, you've done well. Why another one? Like, isn't that enough? And it really comes down to a biblical story about the scorpion and the toad. It's what I do, right? And it's not an effort, it's just what I do. So in the early days, like 2 decades ago, I founded a company called Best Practice, and then another one called Wound Outcomes, and then a Practical Medical Supply. And then Virtual Solutions Global, now iWound. Why is that? Well, this is not going to be my last rodeo either. So it's just what I do and what I enjoy doing. I like creating. And it's not about, a lot of people say, you've made enough money. It's not about that. It is not about that. It's the satisfaction of bringing innovation to the marketplace and seeing it make great outcomes in the healthcare space. And, at the end of the day, money doesn't matter. It doesn't. It's a satisfaction that you've made a change. And that's what the companies have done. This is one I truly believe is going to pave a highway of creating an army at the bedside of better clinicians in terms of wound care. That's what I'm excited about.
And I really like that point. I mean, it's not I think a lot of people in the healthcare setting are not, they're not driven by the money outcome. Obviously everyone needs to sustain themselves, but I think it's the passion that they bring into it, because they know that there's an outcome. That outcome is helping people get back to their lives, helping people feel better, and actually, it's the outcomes focus that I think makes a big difference. So, and again, this is not everybody that has that mentality. So it always helps to have a clinical background. You've experienced it firsthand. You know exactly what it's like to help these people out. So that's an important factor that not everybody has.
Yeah. Well, thanks for agreeing with me on that matter.
Okay, so I wanted to touch it on the topic of wound care itself, because I did a little bit of background research, as I do for all guests. But one of the things that I was very surprised by is just the size, I guess, of this field. I didn't realize it was so big. I mean, it encompasses a lot. It's not only big from a market perspective, but it affects a lot of people. So we're talking about a very wide range of clinical, medical, real life applications of this. I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit. What's the scope of the wound care practice?
I sure can. Now, just so we're all clear, I reside in Canada. I reside in a province, and I reside in a small area. And in this small area, just let me illuminate this for you just for a second. We've got hospitals, we've got long-term care, we've got community placement, we've got clinics. So let's have a look at community, right? Bricks and mortars, streets where people live. I know for a fact on a Monday morning, one of the agencies deploys 350 nurses on a Monday morning. And they have to do roughly 10 to 12 visits to, substantiate their payment for that day. So 4,200 people are seen on that Monday morning. 48% are wounds. And you know what? Of those 350 clinicians, there was 4 or 5 of us, wound specialists, that ran out and dealt with that need. It just doesn't cut the mustard. So in my province, it's a $1.5 billion burden on the tax money. In North America, I just don't even go there. I don't think I can come up with a number that big. You talk about wound care, people think, well, how do you make a career in wound care? Like, where are the wounds? You have no idea. You have no idea. It's a massive, massive, multi-billion-dollar market. So we're trying to contain costs. We're trying to get better care at the bedside. And the problem is, and I'm probably jumping into several of your questions in the future. I don't mean to, but every nurse needs to know about blood pressure and INRs and patient drug amount training and all this stuff, but they don't have to know about wound care, because they have somebody in their facilities that's been educated and is the wound clinician. And that's not right. You should not have one person in a silo in a hospital or long-term care that has all the knowledge, or a couple. Everybody that's dealing with your mom's foot should be able to know what they're doing, what they're seeing, what they're applying, what the outcomes are, what the teaching for your mom should be. And that's not the case. Ergo, iWound. That's why we've created that.
One of the things that that I was thinking about, it was mulling over in my mind. So you've got general. So if you're going through, let's say, nursing school or medical school, once you come out of that, you're really a generalist for the most part, right? And you've got.
Sorry, cut you off. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm thinking about this because I recently kind of came across a comment from a clinician that I thought was interesting, in the sense that, if you're taking a few courses in a particular area, does that make you a specialist? Because there are podiatrists, there are dietitians, there are pharmacists. These are all, nth degree specialists in a subset of what you would get if you were just going through, your four-year MD program, 4-year nursing program. And, so can one sort of generalist coming out of the program really know everything about it? And in the same way, I mean, a wound specialist is somebody that you rely on as like the expert. That goes beyond just the 4-year training program, right?
Absolutely. So, it's interesting. You have MDs, you have nurses, you have nurse practitioners, you have PSWs, you have RPNs, you have elemental PQ, RST coming out of 4-year, 5-year, 8-year. And you know what? They know about hyperlipidemia, insulin resistance, hypertension. God bless these clinicians. They've dedicated their lives. They've got a huge width and breadth of practice. Wound care, they don't have time in academia to teach that. It's not as a weekend seminar. It's not a month of reading a book. It's actually a lot of study, a lot of application, and then guess what? Disseminating theory into practice. And that's where the real art form comes. And that doesn't come from a weekend seminar. So yeah, let's not pick on the doctors, the nurses, the nurse practitioners for not knowing about wound care. But my goodness, can't we improve care at the bedside? How can we give best practice and clinical guidelines and new technologies to all the people dealing with people in a way that it's one, cost containing and easily accessible and easy to understand, and builds a huge army of people that are better at wound care. And really, I'm just talking about our mission statement. This is really what iWound's all about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, well said. We'll come back to the point of the cost containment because that is such a huge factor in a healthcare system, not just the Canadian system, really. I think any healthcare system virtually that is increasingly unsustainable. And if there's any way to improve it and cost contain, that is the way to go. That is, in fact, it's a necessity. It has to go in that direction. So we'll touch on that a lot more. Okay. So I'm very curious. So you went through a series of ventures even before iWound, and how did the iWound transition happen? Have you consistently sort of continued to work as a clinician alongside founding, I believe, iWound?
Well, okay. So how did iWound spawn from my years of clinical bedside training? Now I went off to university to be an architect. And I left after a year and became a musician and got signed and was on the charts and did very well.
Wow.
So I went back into nursing and did a diploma in nursing, a science degree in nursing, nurse practicing education, and then wound consulting. So another 9 years after high school. And during that whole course, I mean, iWound was never in my mind. I became a certified clinical specialist in wound care. And I worked in the community, I worked in the hospital, I worked in long-term care. But sometimes there's a change in funding and things affect care at the bedside. And I saw in my province a pullback on one mechanism in funding, and I'm not going to mention it because I don't want to be disrespectful, but it took the clinical experts from the bedside and just threw it on the hands of nurses that didn't know too much about wound care and doctors that didn't know too much about wound care. And truly, we did see some people getting in trouble, infected wounds, becoming septic, people passing away from septic wounds. And it's in the news. I mean, it's not my opinion. Okay. I'm not speaking on my opinion. This is fact. So, am I philanthropic? Am I trying to change the system? No, I just figured maybe there's a way, something, that small little thing I can do to kind of maybe teach people or, make it more accessible. And remember, there's lots of educational series on wound care right in my country. There's wonderful, but they're expensive and they're time consuming. And unfortunately, nurses are busy and they work for the weekend to get home to their loved ones and have a good weekend. And the last thing they want to do is be more busy trying to learn a brand new specialty. And it's a daunting task. There's a lot of information. So I thought to myself, how can we encapsulate 20 years of my knowledge and put it in the pocket of everybody? You can't. Well, we did. So I recorded 100 films. I took the basic, here's a good skin, here's bad skin, up to here's a scalpel cutting tissue out of a wound, and So everything I know in 20 years, I've encapsulated in iWound and then put it into an algorithm. So once a person understands all the terminology of wound care, which it's not a difficult task, now they're able to get to the bedside in less than 30 seconds, know what best practice is. And that's astounding. I'm not too sure how our company created that, but we did. And we're very, very proud of it.
Welcome to iWound, the complete solution for wound care at the bedside. Combining decades of clinical expertise vetted with cutting-edge software for 3D rendering and mathematical calculations for wound care. The first thing you will do is register into iWound. This is your own personal portal access to the platform. iWound strictly adheres to HIPAA compliance, ensuring patients' safety and privacy. When you log into the iWound platform, there are two pathways: education and wound management. The educational pathway provides a clinician with over 100 educational wound care videos, from the basic to the advanced. In this segment, I'm going to walk you through assessing a wound. Okay, now we're going to measure the wound. It's important to touch on the fact that different locations. The wound management pathway utilizes photo as well as video, measuring length, width, and depth to sub-millimeter accuracy. It also generates a 3D render of the wound showing tissue composition. The next step is to document your findings on the assessment form. The algorithm will generate the etiology and symptoms, and within 30 seconds, provide you best practice recommendations. Well, here we have a stage 1. Stage 1 is basically, classically, termed as a non-blanchable erythema. Different presentation, different skin type. iWound app is both mobile and fully integratable in your workflow EMR. iWound, revolutionizing wound care. The solution is here. Contact us for further information.
Okay, well, there's quite a bit to unpack there, so we'll get into a couple of those elements for sure.
Yeah, I don't think I answered your question.
No, this is it's an interesting start. Again, there's been a shift for years and years now towards digitalization of the medical field in a number of ways, including the education piece, which I think is one of the big focuses of the iWound app, which is fascinating that someone actually did it, which is you guys. And the question has always been, who's gonna take on this challenge? So someone has to, and you can't just look at it from, it's not just a business problem to solve. It has to be a collaboration with people that really understand healthcare, that understand clinical practice, and that know how to scale it, turn it into a product that can scale and can actually be useful in real practice. So in some ways we're kind of waiting for somebody like you and your background to actually come together with the complement of a very excellent team. And I wonder if that's something that you can comment on a little bit. How did the founders come together? How did you guys meet? Did you know each other before?
Well, first of all, I don't want to fly by some very nice things you said. So thank you very much. It was very kind of you, Dorian. And we are proud. And you know what? It's not about us. It's about doing some great things. So I'm glad you look at it that way. Simply you can build the most attractive Ferrari, right? Put it in your backyard, and everybody will want it. But unless they see it, you're not going to sell it. Right? So one man's idea, one man's vision, there's lots of people out there with great ideas, but you need a team. You need complement. You need infrastructure. I was blessed. I was absolutely blessed a few years in meeting a gentleman by the name of David Westlake. This is a man that has vision beyond vision, and he recognizes talent. He recognizes brand new opportunities in the marketplace with no competition. And David warmly welcomed a partnership in this company. And then, of course, we built an infrastructure around there with, lead generation, marketing, advertising. The president of the company, Ray Garneau, definitely comes from a sweet spot of knowing business development better than anybody. He'll put together the thoughts in a meeting that just I don't agree with. I don't see it. It goes against my grain. It just doesn't make sense. But now I've learned that that's a specialty in and of itself. So my point is, you need a whole bunch of people to come together. You can't just have a quarterback. Somebody's got to catch that ball. So I have an absolutely phenomenal team. We have a board of directors, shareholders, people that have invested in the company. It's a whole culmination of efforts. It's not just the thought leaders that come up with a algorithm. That's just a thought. You have to have all the background behind that.
Mm-hmm. And the algorithm is another piece that I wanted to touch on in a little bit. For anybody watching too, we'll see if we can get a clip up, but there's certainly a lot of great information on the company website, the iWound website, which you can go and check out, and I'll include a link in the description as well. But it was really cool to see that you actually show up right on the landing page in a clip, I think, on the website. So you're clearly part of the video content that goes into the training portion of the app. So that's really cool. So I mean, this is real life validation that the person that's actually building this product and marketing and selling it has lived experience actually doing this stuff. So that's an excellent compliment, I think.
Well, thank you very much. And listen, I can't make this stronger. It's not about me. Okay, this is a company. It's my whole team. It's everybody involved. But everybody in the app, it's me. It's all me. So it's all my clinical expertise. So you're going to get standardization. You're going to get best practice. You don't get any bias information. You get clinical randomized control trials. And the great thing is it's equipped to deal with just about anything at the bedside. And yet I'm not even close to finished. I have so many more modules and so many more great things to teach people. But you have to be careful too on how you educate people on a subject, because you can lose them very, very quickly. If you're not engaging, your information's not palatable and easily understood, people won't understand it, they won't retain it, and they won't share it. And that's really the three things that's most important to me is you got to understand it, you better remember it, and if you do, you can tell your colleague at the bedside, now two of you know it. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of gobbledygook that you're going to forget after a weekend seminar. And that's the problem. People go to these great seminars. They take these educational evenings at a hotel, and they are wonderful. But you forget it. Our application's in your hand, in your pocket, and it's available 24/7. If you ever want to refer to it, it's right there. And that's the beauty of it, too.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if we can get into how exactly the content is structured a little bit, because so what we know so far, so you've created well over 100 pieces of content, all focused on training education. It's actually based on this is the kind of information that you would get if you were going to school, so to speak, for it. Like it's the real deal. It's evidence-based, I believe. And yes, as you were developing the content that goes into the app, how do you incorporate new pieces of information? There's standard of care, of course, but then there's always new stuff coming out. How do you go about doing that?
Well, absolutely. Without getting into a deep dive, and people that are listening to this and not really understanding, there's pressure sores. Okay, so stages 1, 2, 3, 4. There's leg ulcers, venous ulcers, there is arterial wounds, there's surgical wounds, and there's diabetic feet wounds, okay? That's never gonna change. And in all those areas, there's these layers of skin, right? That's never gonna change. So how do you update that information? You don't. What happens is we have all of these wonderful manufacturers. I'm not gonna name them, but everybody knows them. And they all have a hand in wound care because it's such a big marketplace, right? It's a business. Let's not be silly here. It's a business. So every year, company A comes out with this new slant on this product category that everybody's been using, but so that's when I talk about updating clinical guidelines. Nothing's going to change in terms of turning, repositioning people, offloading people, making sure people are, incontinence, dry and tidy. Those are the precursors for all these wounds. And, people with proper education on diet and nutrition, et cetera, diabetes. So that's never going to change. The new technologies, that's also not going to change. It's going to keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. And it's a daunting task because what happens, Dorian, is I'll go into a long-term care facility in a month. And by the end of the month, I've been in 60 different facilities. And I see this purple or this green or this yellow new product that everybody's trying on all these wounds because it's deemed as appropriate for all these wounds. And guess what? They're really not. These are purpose-built products. And I talk in one of my lectures, I don't want to go sideways here, but I talk about driving a pickup truck to church and a Cadillac to the construction site. I mean, these are purpose-built vehicles dealing with certain applications, and wound care is no different. So it's important that as we get these new products in the marketplace, that through push notifications, and that's a wonderful thing. So the manufacturers want to do in-servicing, they want to do, rounds and get into doctor's office and trade shows and talk about their new purple thing. Well, can you imagine if you reached out to 1 million people at the bedside and told them about your purple thing? So that's what iWound does. So I shoot a film on new technologies. I get it right into the hand of the clinicians with the iWound application, and they learn about new technologies right away. And it's not a case of just marketing and making dollars. That's not what this is about. This is about utilizing products properly with good outcomes, because we talk about chronic wounds being 80% of the cost of wound care. That's because purple things are put on wounds and people try things. And God bless them, they're trying. They mean the best. They're trying to heal wounds. But it's important to use the right product at the right time. That's how you heal people.
Mm-hmm. I imagine there's also a component around how quickly anybody who's coming out with a new product, a new type of bandage, a new type of
and good word. Yeah, that's what they are. Yeah.
Yeah. Any of these new technologies. But if you're a new player, or if you're a company that's just trying to launch a brand new product, how do you deploy that out, and how do you get the education to the people that are the supposed end users? And so I imagine there's a lag, right, in the way that things are currently kind of set up. If you're, there are hundreds of thousands of clinicians that would be dealing with wound care, and how does everyone find out about this new great technology that's out there?
iWound.
iWound.
Truly, yeah. And it's not about, hey, look at us, we're popular, we've got to. No, it's simple solution. People have a conduit right to the bedside, and that's what iWound is. We're not a PDF, we're not an Excel, we're not a website, we're not a weekend. We're a digital piece in the pocket of a person that wants to do better care. So if they do, we'll deploy all new technologies. We'll tell them about it in my own verbiage and tell them how to use it and all the fine details around that. So I think that truly is a wonderful thing for all the manufacturers with new technologies. So that's how iWound keeps up with technologies. Anything new, we'll be deploying. Like, this isn't a static product. The wounds are static, they don't change. And how you take care of wounds in terms of basic turning, repositioning, proper nutrition, protein, all of that never changes. But the products we use in the wounds will always be changed because it's a business, right?
And just like you guys are focused on delivering, outcomes-based technologies and tools to clinicians, a lot of other manufacturers and a lot of other institutions and organizations want to do the same thing. They do care about the outcomes. And so, if there's a new technology and it's proven to be perhaps better than standard of care, why not launch that in a way that's consistent across the healthcare sector and is taken up rapidly, rather than, having to wait months for someone in, let's say, I don't know, Saskatchewan might take it up more slowly than someone in New Brunswick or something like that. So if you can deploy that across the field, updating the standard of care quickly, that is obviously an ideal scenario.
Well, it's interesting. That's a really excellent point, Dorian. Dorian, sorry, I'm jumping over my tongue here. If you look at accessibility and portability of healthcare, I mean, it doesn't. It's not fair that somebody in Saskatchewan has to wait, where somebody downtown Toronto gets all the care and all the new technologies. So I think these companies with their, they have reps, they have sales reps and people to go out and have meetings, and they do a great job. They do a fantastic job. This conduit that we provide is just I find a quicker, more efficient means to get to everybody in real time. So, and it's not a bias, it's just a fact. I mean, digital is the way. Look at e-health, right? Somebody's got a problem, you jump on, you talk to a doctor, and hopefully you get the right treatment and outcome. So I just think this is more current, what we're doing with push notifications. And so.
Yeah, agreed. Now, so again, for anybody that wants to check this out and go on the website and find out some more information, I think one of the things that you'll come across right away is that there are certain advantages listed on the website for the iWound Care app over how things are currently done for the most part. And one of those advantages is that there's a standardization of assessments of new wounds. There's also an evidence-based treatment of wounds education piece. And then the other thing that's really interesting is that you can actually monitor wound care and update treatment practices or the treatment plan as needed throughout the process. And I think this is especially relevant for chronic wounds, but acute wounds I think would also that would go a long way there as well. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit. So what are the main advantages, and how do you see that?
My goodness, you left me about 17 bullets to talk about there. Two I'll gravitate immediately. It's interesting. You're at the bedside and you're looking at an awful wound with, pseudomonas coming out of it, dead tissue, and there's a bone sticking out. I mean, the worst we can possibly see. An iWound will tell you what to do at that point. And then the question is, okay, well, thank you. You told us what to do with the wound. That wound could take 4 to 6 months to heal, right? Well, what do we do in 2 weeks or 4 weeks when there's a subtle change in that wound? Because there will be most often. And it's these subtle changes that people don't recognize to cascade them through inflammation, proliferation, and maturation. And what our app does, this is really exciting. It doesn't give you a treatment. It actually tracks a wound till it's healed. And I'll tell you why. At any point, you put the data in the algorithm. You can do it in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks. January 1st, when we told you to use a product for an inflammatory wound, and that wound changes. You don't have to guess what to use. Just follow the app, put your signs and symptoms in, and it's going to tell you whether you need to change that product out to another. And that's the beautiful thing. That's why wounds do not shift from inflammation to proliferation as quick as they should, because people are unsure when to use what product, when to stop using a product, when to shift, what the app does it automatically. So we're really, really proud of that. The other part is the technology. There's a lot of very, very expensive technology. Like one product, I'm not going to name it. It's just a classification. It's called a negative pressure wound therapy. There's many companies have it. It's basically, I don't want to say this, but it's basically a leech. Terrible thing. I'm going to get shot for saying that. But one of the things it does is it invites a lot of blood supply to the wound. Now, these things are very expensive, but they're not. And the reason I say they're not is when they're used appropriately and correctly at the right time and place, they will heal a wound so darn quick, it's not funny. So a lot of people will say, the products you use are expensive, and, those silver alginates are, a box of that is so, but you know what? You're not changing the wound every day. And if you follow it properly and do exactly what you should be doing, you're going to stop using that product in 2 to 4 weeks, and you'll shift to something else and the wound will start healing. But people tend to use just gauze in wounds and betadine in wounds and antiseptics in wounds because they're cheaper and easier and don't take a lot of time. that's your chronic wound. That's why these wounds pervade and prevalence and incidence is as it is. Not beating up on anybody. A nurse that takes gauze and puts it in a wound, God bless them for taking care of somebody. That's a good thing. Let's just do the best we can. That's the point.
So I think this is also touching back on the idea of a cost containment and really a cost effectiveness of using this sort of technology. So have you done any studies or published anything to kind of demonstrate what that would be like? How would it play out?
So this is the remarkable silver bullet behind our complete package. So we brought together two companies, one out of the US called Tissue Analytics, that's in multiple hospitals, and it's done an absolutely astounding job at doing quantitative, not I think, but mathematical quantitative data behind looking at a wound at a set point and then down the road and saying it's healing or not. If it's not, then what do? Well, that's what I do. So we've taken two pieces of bread and we put the meat in the middle. We've got a beautiful, complete deli sandwich now where we have quantitative data. We have all the mustard and the mayo and the pastrami in the middle, teaching and telling people what to do and all the education. And then at the very end, we take another quantitative laser scan of the wound and see what we've done. So in terms of cost containment, listen, if you have one nurse in a facility, that's the wound champion, and two or three that are on the wound team, and the other 47 really don't know too much, you can't tell me by instructing all 47 about wound care properly, first of all, you're going to have better outcomes. Better outcomes, better healing is cost containing. And the other thing is being able to quantitatively look at a wound at one set point and do a longitudinal study on all the composition in the wound, the dead tissue, the healthy tissue, all the products used. We have a mathematical scientific piece that follows and tracks this wound. So we can't tell people we're going to do cost containment. We're going to prove it. And that's the lovely part of this whole development we've had with iWound.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, and Tissue Analytics, they operate on the US side of the last time I checked. Is that right?
Yeah. Tissue Analytics has been in operation for 5 or 6 years. They've been in multiple hospitals, spawned from Johns Hopkins University from two excellent biomed students, Kevin Keenahan and Josh Budsman. And their intellectual property and their beautiful minds spawned Tissue Analytics. And a year ago, I just saw a wonderful opportunity to take quantitative digital mathematics and real-time learning and algorithms and bring it all together as just an absolute powerhouse. It's just such a beautiful product. And I'm biased, of course, but it's a wonderful product.
Okay, so we'll see if we can include a link to Tissue Analytics too. I did a little bit of homework on this as well. I was trying to find out some information on the kind of work that they do. Really sounds interesting, very, very promising, really, really interesting work as well. The combination, this is like the perfect trifecta, it seems to me. So you've got, like you said, clinical background, a tool that is intended to be used by clinicians. Hence, the training even comes from a clinician with decades of experience. Then you've got the AI sort of and data science heavy component that's been tacked onto it. And so, you're perfectly set up to demonstrate not only, improved outcomes, improved cost effectiveness, but also the fact that it can actually be adopted pretty broadly and actually used by potentially someone who's relatively new to the space of wound treatment. And hey, guess what? They can be brought up to speed really quickly. They've got an effective tool that they not only can learn from, but actually can use right off the bat. That seems to me like that's going to have a lot of benefits and a lot of potential to improve outcomes across the system.
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing else to add to that. You did such a good job. I think it's just wonderful to be able to say, we're going to train, we're going to educate all your staff. They've never been trained, not all of them, because you can't afford it. You don't have the time, but we're going to do that. And because of that, you're going to have greater outcomes. Okay, well, we'll see. Well, no, we'll prove. We actually track a wound mathematically in 3-time virtual 3D rotation, length, width, depth, tissue composition, products used, even down to, is a patient adhering to treatment? No, I don't want my wound changed today. No, I don't want it done next week. And after 6 weeks, this chronic wound, we can look at the data and say, well, 34% of the time, your dad didn't want his wound changed. And those are important data points for a province or a state or somebody injecting money into wound care, right? So those are big, big metrics that we're able to collect now, as opposed to me doing a weekend seminar and saying, I'm going to train everybody and they're going to learn and it's just going to really help. Well, how do you prove that? You can't. So I'm very excited about this.
I wanted to come back also to the idea of the kind of data that's being collected and how it can actually be used, and the algorithm behind this tool, which is really, really cool. But I wanted to ask you quickly too, do you have an estimate of how many people, I would say, are currently using it, or that you're potentially partnering with or going to partner with to use this?
Absolutely. So let's be very, very clear here. The company spawned as Trust Robin, which was an educational product with an algorithm. 1 year ago, we ran into these two big guys from Tissue Analytics, and we decided to do an alliance partnership with and put together a complete package. So we spent 9 months doing that. We've done beta testing, and that's how I met you, right? We've done user acceptance testing. Not to let the cat out of the bag, but we're really passionate about making a difference, and not in a little community in some location with 4 long-term care homes. We really want to have some massive metrics, and that's what we've been working on. And I alluded to that at the top of this meeting with you. I'm not really able to discuss what we're doing right now, but yes, we are now coming out with our complete product in a very robust fashion. So who's used it? The Trust Robin app, they've used that. Tissue Analytics, people have been using that for 5 years. The new game changer, it's coming to a theater near you right now.
Welcome to the iWound demo. There are 2 pathways. In the education area, novice learners can become acquainted with the basic to the advanced, a continually updated area with best practice, clinical guidelines, and new technologies. The second area is a groundbreaking technology called documenting a patient. The platform is HIPAA compliant, does not save any personal health information, and can be a clinician's private portal. Initially, you will add a new patient, but secondly, you can look up historical data, track a wound, cascade of healing, with 3D wound imaging, product usage, and quantitative data suggesting healing rates. Let's add a wound. First thing you will do is put in an identifier. You don't want to put in a patient's name, birth date, address, social insurance number. So create your own client tracking number, whatever you may want to use. Secondly, you will select a wound model. On this wound model, you will actually locate the exact location of the wound. This prevents confusing one wound from another. Once you accept the model and the location of the wound, you're ready to take a 2D and 3D picture of the wound. We utilize a calibration sticker approximated to the wound that allows us to get sub-millimeter accuracy. Once you've taken a picture, then you can take a 3D rendering of the wound. Simply rotate your device around the wound, keeping the calibration sticker in the frame. No fancy lighting is required, no fancy phone is required. This has all been vetted. Then we use the video. When you continue on, Now we're able to add in tunneling and undermining. You may want to add that or not. Once you've added the tunneling, the undermining, you will submit that. Voila, now you're on the documentation algorithm. This will calculate your input and provide best practice results in less than 30 seconds. Provide a wound number, a location. Okay, now you can look at the etiology of the wound. You can grade it, you can stage it. It might be partial thickness, full thickness. We'll call this one a stage 3. Now, what might the wound bed look like? It may be sloppy. Drainage may be purulent, and it's important to note how much drainage you have. Now, a proper wound assessment looks at things like discomfort, odor, erythema, etc., or you may not have any of those associated symptoms. Once you have provided the documentation, the algorithm, you submit it, you hit the treatment button, and in less than 30 seconds, you are provided best practice recommendations. We provide a few options because there's preferred vendor contracts in some areas, and we like to provide a good cross-reference of all the wound manufacturers' products. If you go into the formulary and go under foams, you'll also see other manufacturers' foams. So this works very well in preferred vendor locations. Now you're going to analyze the wound, see the analysis. This will give you your 2D and 3D rendering of the wound, perimeter. It will also tell you tissue composition. So when you look through the cascade of healing, you can see rates of granular tissue, sloughy, and necrotic tissue. And at any point, you can visualize the wound. When you're in the education modules, very basic to advanced education can be found. Things like skin, staging, healing, wound products, data collection, past medical history, circulation, compression wraps, ABPIs, toe pressures, arterial wound signs and symptoms and tests, wound bed preparation, debridement, methods of debridement, and also a complete module on the diabetic foot. Well, here we are. We're at the end of the diabetic foot module. There's been a lot of information we have covered. And yes, indeed, the diabetic foot is a bit of a daunting task, but I hope that we've given you a system to save you time and energy and make you comfortable at the bedside.
Is that going to play out mostly on the Canadian side, US side, both?
I'm sorry, but you asked globally.
Globally, okay.
Yeah, wounds aren't just in the US and in Canada, UK, Belgium, France. Their wounds are everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Sounds ambitious and certainly much needed around the world.
Thank you.
And okay, so the piece that really kind of caught my attention is the 3D imaging, the 3D rendering that you can get, and let me see if I can kind of wrap my head around how this would work. So it's an app. You can go on the Google App Store, I believe on the Apple App Store as well. You could download the app. It's going to be on your phone. You have, for anybody that has a modern smartphone, you've got a pretty high resolution camera. As a clinician, you'd be able to use that, point the camera to, let's say, a new patient's wound. That'll generate a 3D rendering of the actual wound. It can classify it. It can develop a treatment plan. It can assess it. Everything is done essentially automatically.
It is. It is. There's a piece. Sorry, Dorian. No. Sorry.
Yeah, the 3 so the what is it called? The computer vision algorithm with the 3D rendering. How did that get developed? How did that happen? Because it sounds really high tech, which is awesome.
Well, it is. And remember, the 2D tissue composition, longitudinal tracking in 3D is Tissue Analytics. That's our alliance partner. So I can't speak to the development, but I will tell you this. it's okay for somebody to download an app. And the app that's out there right now is a tickler. It's not a functional app. If you go on iTunes or you go on Google Play, you just get a tickler. There's lots of roadblocks and things that don't work. And that's a tickler to get people to communicate with us, right? So the real one's coming out real soon. But think about this. Think about this. A nurse has people who are terminally ill, they're palliative, people who are obese, people who have diabetes, people that have Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. Like, nurses are burdened with just a multifaceted pathologies, and they have to document all day on this, turning, positioning, medications giving, improvements, deterioration, etc. Last thing they want to do is use an app and get all this data in an app, and then still have to go back to a piece of paper or an online monitor and put in. So that's double documentation, and we don't want that. So what we do, it seems like we're providing an app. We're not. What we're providing is a digital highway that gets integrated into the workflow, into a hospital, into long-term care chains, that gets into their EMR. Okay, so the piece that these nurses and doctors and nurse practitioners are using to document every day, when they use the app, it hits the cloud and gets through the firewall under HIPAA regulations, the most heavy vetted Privacy Act, where we comply with all of that. So the app will take your scan and it'll take your data, but it's shoved up to the cloud, it's put into the EMR, and it's into your EMR data point. Okay, so I know it's an app, but it's really a conduit to get into your workflow, and that's the beautiful part of this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and ultimately, though, at the end of the day, the very novel piece, if you will, is going to be this 3D kind of vision based algorithm that's developed. And I think one of the things that crossed my mind as I was thinking about this is, why would you need a 3D model? Like, wounds are not 2D, obviously, and the app is set to deal with essentially any kind of wound. Right. From a bone sticking out of your skin, obviously you would want a 3D model to understand exactly what's going on, to just a surface abrasion, a cut, a bruise, something, a slight burn, what have you.
Well, if you look at what we're able to do, so we'll take a 2D composition of length and width. Okay, so it's 7 centimeters by 3 centimeters. Now, where it gets really exciting is there's 22% healthy tissue, 42% sloughy tissue, and another percentage of necrotic tissue. That's fine. Now, when we do a 3D scan, there could be tunneling, there could be undermining. The wound bed's not even, it's all over the place. So by able to track from 1 week to the next week to a month and look at these 3D rotations and these tissue compositions, it gives you a much more thorough visualization of the wound. A 3D rotation of the wound's not going to heal a wound. It's really neat. It's nice to look at. It's innovative, and that's not the key. The key is by being able to have a better look of that over time and see how that changes the tunneling, the undermining, the wound bed topography. That's the beautiful part of it. Mm-hmm. It's just a better way of looking at the wound.
Mm-hmm. I imagine too, I mean, as you're going through clinical training, they present real life models of whatever it is that you're learning about, right? So the visual aspect, I think, goes a long way. Plus, you know, wounds are, again, like we were talking, is they're not skin deep. They're complex. There's vasculature, there are nerve endings that come into play. There's all kinds of other different layers of the skin and what have you. So to be able to see this and how it's progressing over time, that longitudinal piece I'm catching on is extremely important here. And it's not something that's possible really right now. Not really.
It's everything. Yeah, longitudinal tracking quantitatively. It's nice that I teach. It's great. Hopefully I'm good at teaching. Hopefully the algorithm will get people to the bedside using the right products. But, you know, they say you haven't done it unless it's written down. If it hasn't been written down, it hasn't been done. Well, same thing. If you can't prove what I'm telling people, how can you tell people my education is going to help better outcomes? Well, we can now, because we track, we show a report on what we're implementing, what products we're using, and people can cleanly see. And it's very, very exciting.
Mhm. Now, I wanted to shift a little bit to the idea of access. We kind of touched on this in a couple different ways up until now, but realistically, what's the avenue here to get this into the hands of clinicians on a wide scale? I don't know how much you can speak to this. I know there's some of this might be in the works at the moment, but from a market access perspective, how would you get this into hospitals, private practices, and paramedics hands and so on? How would that deployment happen?
Well, you kind of spoke to it initially, but I don't know when this will air, but in a very short period of time, we're ergo Christmas 2020. So new year, January 2021, we'll be looking at a full upgraded launch on iTunes and Google. So access, just go download it. It's free. Just go grab it. Integration into healthcare sectors, that's all part of a bigger play, shall I say. A clinician can download it and say, I'd like it in my hospital, and talk to their materials management and chief technology officer and say, we'd like this integrated into the medical records, and they could contact us. But you see the point I'm trying to make. It's one person, one CTO. It's bigger than that for us. It's much bigger. For us to make an outcome, an improvement, and get the metrics to show that we've improved, we need a big footprint. So we're working on a conduit to take a big piece of the pie right now.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's very
But
much
anybody
in the
can
works.
access it, Dorian. Sorry to cut you off. Anybody can access it, though.
This also makes me wonder about the app itself. Is going to be, I mean, it's meant to be used by essentially anybody, or anybody can use it ultimately, but there will also be a version of it that's going to be specific to healthcare settings, hospitals, clinics, emergency, or acute care centers, that sort of thing. Is that
Yeah.
the thinking?
Well, I guess the only way to answer that is, if you're at home in the community, you could have a stage 1, 2, 3, 4, partial thickness, venous, diabetic ulcer, post-surgical, palliative wound. You can have that in hospital, in a long-term care. Everything in the wound is applicable to multi-sectors. We're not talking about sunburns and, an abrasion or maybe a little cut or a hangnail. We're talking about wounds that cost $5,000 to $40,000 to heal. And that's why the burden is so big, and it's real. And we're trying to get people healed quicker with better care. And the only thing that's going to spawn from that is cost containment, right? That's just what comes from better care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's going to be really, really fascinating when it actually enters into hospitals and people can actually start to use it. You touched on this too, the integration within current and existing EMRs, the connectivity of new applications, digital applications that are coming out nowadays. It's integration is top of mind for everybody. The ability to develop something that's HIPAA compliant and consistent with any updates that come out of that, data privacy, data sharing space is extremely important. Is that how is that kind of incorporated? Is that on the tissue analytics side? Mostly, are they?
Well, it's not so much on the tissue analytics side. It's really in our full product iWound. Nothing is captured in the smartphone, whether it's an iPhone, a Google, Android, or iPad, doesn't matter, a tablet. It's a conduit to get to the dashboard, to get to the cloud, to access the software. So you may take a picture of somebody's tailbone that's infected, and it's just a very private area. And most of these wounds are very private. And the last thing you want is somebody's mother's name and their body parts on a phone. I mean, that you can't do that, and we would never do that. So the devices simply are a conduit to be able to access the cloud and use it to get to best practice. Nothing is stored on the devices. It's all HIPAA compliant, behind the firewall, in major institutions like John Hopkins hospitals, and it's all compliant. It's been vetted for years.
Mhm. Now, one of the things that I see coming out of this is the ability to, I guess, on the theme of connectivity, sort of zooming out a little bit, but essentially there is a multidisciplinary team that could be involved in very complex wounds to help the patient not only get treated, but also to recover. And, down the road, I imagine that a lot of patients are also interested in recovering without scarring. So I think there's an aesthetic component. I think that'll come into it as well. Do you envision, potentially pairing iWound with other services, community-based services, let's say for patients that are, have recovered from a wound for the most part, but need to undergo physiotherapy, or, need to see another medical specialist in the community to sort of get through that final kind of stage of recovery? Is that a possibility?
Well, that absolutely is a great question. So, you know, people think we go to the bedside and look at the hole in the patient. You look at the whole patient, and the whole patient is their neighbor, their aunt, the physician, the plastic surgeon, the endocrinologist, the dietitian, the physiotherapist, the palliative, that's all in our education. This is a multidisciplinary approach to wound care. And I'll tell you, some of the chronic wounds, like diabetic foot wounds that don't have proper orthotics and don't have proper nutritional monitoring and don't have the support, just simple support to help people through difficult times so they can comply with these treatment plans. That's where you get chronicity and diabetic foot wounds, venous stasis ulcers, and whatnot. So yes, we not only link with our care plan, and our teaching embodies the whole team. And once the wound is healed, let's remember that's not original tissue. That can break down very quickly. So we don't just shake hands with people and push them through the door. We hold their hand, and we hold the clinician's hand as long as they want to hold our hand. But there's lots of things you need to do ongoing to prevent further decupitous ulcers, or, there's I'm sorry, I just can't think of it. I know it, but I can't think of the factor right now. But, a diabetic foot ulcer, once you've had one, there's a very high percentage you're going to get another one. And that's simply education, right? That's simply education.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So,
Wonder if I can get your prediction, I guess, in terms of, it sounds like the company is going to be collecting a lot of very useful information.
mhm.
Maybe data that really hasn't really been collected before, or certainly not in any kind of coordinated way. The data itself obviously has a tremendous value from a outcomes demonstration view, from a cost effectiveness demonstration view, and to be used in clinical practice and in clinical research and that sort of thing. So do you envision that being part of the iWound strategic vision, if you will, of just collecting useful information that can be
Oh,
applied
absolutely,
in a variety of ways?
100%. I mean, it's listen, we're passionate about teaching people. We're passionate about getting better care at the bedside. But remember the big message here. We're going to prove it. We're going to stand behind what we are offering up to the healthcare space, that we want to improve outcomes, and we're going to prove it. Now, are you saying, will we take that data and sell it to a major healthcare company? So that's not really height of mind right now. Is that a real opportunity? Yes, data is a huge commodity, but that's not why the app is built to collect data. It's for us to say to people, trust us. We want to help you. We want to do better care at the bedside. And if you let us try, we're going to prove that we've done it or failed. And that's a beautiful part of the data and the quantitative metrics that we have. It's listen, I could talk about it all day.
Really interested. So where do you see the company going? Let's say there's a lot of things happening very quickly, I think, right now. And I know we can't get into all the details. Where do you see things kind of playing out, let's say 5 years down the road, in terms of iWound?
Well, Remember, I am the founder of the Notion, not the founder of the company, the founder of the Notion. I do have business partners. I have shareholders. I've got, lots of people involved. So everybody has a different vision. Some are hearkening quick acquisition, venture partnerships with other major players. I'll tell you where my mind's at. My mind's at this. Get the vehicle out, get the vehicle doing great things, and be honest about that. Celebrate better outcomes, and wonderful things come. What they are, it could be acquisition, it could be venture partnerships with other companies. All of that's really kind of on our plate right now. But I'm just focusing on the product, getting the product out, and doing great work. So we can talk in another 6 months, a year. I don't know what's coming, but 5 years. I'll probably be speaking Japanese in 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how things go. It's hard to think that far out, even just given the current climate,
well, it's a
current
good question.
environment.
I don't mean to be callous, Dorian.
No. No, it's a good point too, and I would agree with that. I think ultimately, I think it's a sign you're doing great work if the uptake is high, if people are actually using the app, and if you can demonstrate the outcomes, being improved over standard of care, relative care. Had iWound never existed or never been taken up, I mean, that'd be a huge thing to demonstrate. And again, it's a huge industry, and it's huge because it affects a lot of people. And so if you can make a dent in that and do it in a way that hasn't been done before and have better outcomes, all the power to you. Hopefully it does scale as much as it possibly can.
Yeah.
I wanted to also get your impression. We had a guest previously that was developing a handheld bioprinter. I thought this was really cool technology. Bioprinting has become extremely popular, not just in the healthcare setting, but across a variety of sectors. But that brings to mind a variety of other technologies that have come on the market. There's spray on skin, I believe, that came out not too long ago. There are smart bandages where there's a chip or something built into it where it'll actually help heal wounds much faster. There are new types of bandages, biofoams, all kinds of filters, and so on. So all these new fancy things coming out. I think one of the things that's really interesting is how do you test them out? How do you get people to use them, try them, and then to actually deploy them?
Wonderful question. Wonderful question.
What's your impression? How can iWound potentially help in that way?
Well, once again, I think we are pioneering a wonderful piece here. So, Acme Company comes out with this microchip that they think will debride wounds quicker than anything, and it likely will. So they go out and they do trade shows and in-servicing. And so what we do is this. So we take Acme and we take 12 of our hospitals and we take 5 patients with wounds that need to be debrided. We now have 60 clients, and we use the microchip in those 60 clients. We do a quantitative 2D and 3D rendering of this wound. We now have iWound teach best practice and an algorithm to use that product properly. And then at the end of that, we do another 2D and 3D rendering of the wound. And we've done a clinical trial, and we prove that chip works. Not by looking at it, measuring it, and looks better and document. We have quantitative, mathematical laser scans of the wound to prove it worked. So that's another great thing that iWound can do for all the new technologies, bring them into the marketplace, put them through our conduit, and we can actually quantitatively prove improvements in wound care.
You read my mind too, because I come from the biotech world primarily, and there are a number of companies that new technology that are coming out purely focused on how do you essentially you bring patients on board to test out these new therapies, these new technologies that folks think can be very promising, show a lot of promise, but you can't get something to get on the market without testing it out first, especially in the medical space. So in the same way that clinical trials need to be done for medicines, for new technologies, and there are companies focused on doing just that, getting trials up to speed a lot quicker, getting patients on board faster, and doing a better job of tracking outcomes patients. It really, this was a thought that crossed my mind too, is that if you can get iWound to be adopted broadly, I mean, this is yet another prong that it can help with. A really big one too, I would say. So very interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will not be in the practice of just trying snake oil on wounds. I mean, things have to be put through the rigors of randomized control trials and double-blind placebo studies, etc. So when we're going to use a product in a clinical trial, it's not just going to be let's see if this works. There's some research behind it. We have to feel, vetted that this is actually clinically sound product. We just have a way of using it and showing mathematically a good improvement or not so good improvement. So I think that's an exciting piece that we do offer to the marketplace.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Really cool stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how things progress over the next couple months and couple years for sure. So Robin, I know we're coming a little bit short on time here, so I would love to keep talking about this for the next couple hours, but unfortunately we don't have that kind of time, especially on a Friday afternoon. So, sure. I wanted to turn it over to you. Was there anything you wanted to mention as sort of a going away message, if you will, about where the company's mission, vision, where you see it going before we wrap up, and yeah, then we'll take it from there.
Well, really, the vision and the mission has been really recapitulated through this conversation. We truly, truly want to have good outcomes, and we want to build an army at the bedside of good care providers. And it's just not there. I'm not beating up on the system. I'm not beating up on, inept care providers. They do so many other great things. But our mission really is to get a big part of the clinical bedside providers more attuned to wound care. That's really the mission. There is one message here that it's funny you didn't ask me this question because it has come up. You do have people in hospital and long-term care and the community that are wound specialists. I was one of them. I am one of them. Are we trying to put them out of business? No. Why would we do that? We need those people. Wouldn't it be lovely if all their colleagues around them could do a better job and help them do a better job? This isn't about putting clinical specialists out of work. We need those people. So that's an important piece for people to understand. This is just building a better team around the already effective conduit.
I appreciate you clearing that up. That's exactly the thought that crossed my mind too. Not the first version of putting people out of business. No, I assume that. I mean, there's. This is a really interesting point, and we're going to go off on a slight tangent here for a second. But the conversation around technology and AI replacing clinicians. This has been, this goes back a number of years. And as far as I can tell, I've yet to come across anybody that is actually developing a new technology that actually thinks it should replace clinicians. Everyone's talking about complementary, enhancing care, providing even better outcomes. No one's really talking about replacing.
Well, if you think about predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, there's components of all of that in what we provide. But the tool is only as effective as the people putting the data into it. If we don't have somebody at the bedside taking care of that person, putting the data into the tool, you may as well put it in the garbage. It doesn't run itself. We need real, live, caring people at the bedside. This just helps them do a better job. That's all.
Mm-hmm. And track longitudinal outcomes, which will go a long way.
Yeah. For reimbursement and all those other things, right?
All important things.
It
for
is.
Sure. Always part of the conversation.
A lot of money put into wound care, and we can help save some of that for sure.
For sure. All right, Robin, this has been an awesome conversation again. I wish we could keep this going for a couple more hours, but I'll tell you what, if you're up for it, I'd love to have you come back on as things progress over the next couple of months, a year or so. And yeah, we'll see how things are going. I am looking forward to seeing a lot of great things happen. So hope to have you come back on at some point.
It'd be my pleasure, and I'm excited to see you again. That'd be a great opportunity.
All right, sounds great. Thanks so much, Robin.
Thanks, Dorian.
Take care.
Bye for now.